Carefully, she collected samples of the film, sealing it in a separate vial. This could be the key to understanding the virus's origin. As she worked, a rustling in the underbrush caught her attention. Emily turned, her instincts kicking in. She scanned the area, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck rise. "Hello," she called, but only silence greeted her. The feeling of being watched returned, more intense this time. She hurriedly finished her sampling, her heart racing, and made her way back to her car, feeling the weight of the unseen eyes following her. Once back at her lab, Emily immediately began analyzing the new samples, a sense of urgency propelling her forward. Hours passed as she meticulously examined the film, desperate for answers. She felt the pressure mounting. Time was running out. Finally, after a lengthy analysis, she found it, a chemical compound consistent with agricultural runoff. It seemed that the nearby fields had been contaminated, likely from overuse of pesticides or fertilizers, which had combined with the water supply and mutated into the virus. With the information in hand, Emily wasted no time. She reached out to Joan and Mark, asking them to meet her at the town hall. They needed to gather as many residents as possible and present the evidence before it was too late. As she drove back to town, her mind raced with fear and determination. She knew that convincing the townspeople would be a monumental challenge, but it was a risk she had to take. They needed to understand the gravity of the situation before the virus spread any further. Arriving at the town hall, Emily found it eerily quiet. The doors were slightly ajar, and she pushed them open, stepping into the dimly lit room. It felt like stepping into a ghost town, the emptiness echoing her concerns. She took a deep breath, summoning her courage, and began to set up her findings on the central table. Just as she was finishing, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Joan and Mark entering, their faces drawn with worry. "Did you find anything?" Joan asked, her voice tense. "Yes," Emily replied, her heart pounding. "We need to gather everyone, now. I have something crucial to share." As they moved through the town, Emily felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She needed to reach everyone who had been at the meeting, especially those who had shown signs of aggression. It was vital to raise awareness about the virus and the source of the contamination. They called for a gathering at the town hall, and gradually, residents trickled in, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. As the room filled, Emily could feel the tension mount. She took her place at the front, her hands trembling slightly but her resolve firm. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "I know many of you are frightened after what happened at the last meeting. But we can't afford to let fear control us. We need to understand what we're facing." She revealed her findings, detailing the virus's behavior and the contamination in the water supply. The room was silent as the residents absorbed the information, disbelief mingling with fear. "Why should we trust you?" a voice shouted from the back, breaking the silence. It was one of the farmers, his eyes filled with suspicion. "I understand your skepticism," Emily replied, her voice firm. "But this isn't just about trust. It's about survival. We need to work together to contain this threat before it's too late." As she spoke, she noticed more faces in the crowd showing signs of anxiety, twitching hands, nervous glances. It became clear that some residents were already showing signs of infection. The tension in the room rose, the air heavy with unease. "Do you have a solution?" Mark interjected, stepping forward. "What can we do?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to quell the fear that bubbled within her. We need to filter the water supply immediately and stop using it until we can ensure it's safe. We also need to monitor those showing aggressive behavior. Isolation may be necessary. A murmur ran through the crowd, skepticism and fear mingling. Isolation. A woman shouted, "You want us to lock people away? Only until we understand how far this has spread." Emily replied urgently, "If we don't act now, we risk losing more than just our livestock." As tension mounted, some residents began to argue, voices rising in panic. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and denial. Some townspeople supported Emily's plan, while others vehemently opposed it, insisting that isolation would only breed distrust and division. "Emily, we can't just start locking people up," Joan pleaded, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "We're a community. We need to stick together, not turn against one another. We're already facing a threat that's tearing us apart." Emily countered, trying to maintain control of the situation. "If we don't take these precautions, we might be condemning ourselves to something much worse." Mark stepped forward, raising his voice to be heard above the din. "What if we created a task force? A group of volunteers who can help monitor those affected and control the water supply. We can keep it contained without turning our backs on each other." Emily nodded, sensing a glimmer of hope in his suggestion. "Yes, we can set up a system where we identify those showing symptoms and help them. But we need cooperation. We have to act quickly." After several tense moments, the crowd began to quiet. Emily could see hesitant nods as fear turned to a reluctant acceptance of the gravity of their situation. She seized the moment. "Let's form a task force," she proposed. "We'll need volunteers to manage the water supply, monitor symptoms, and communicate with one another. This is about survival, and we can only do it together." Slowly, hands began to raise. Emily felt a surge of relief as community members expressed their willingness to help. She and Mark took note of those willing to join the task force, establishing roles for each volunteer. "We'll need to filter the water supply immediately," Emily said, her heart racing with determination. "Let's set up a central location where we can distribute safe drinking water and make sure everyone knows not to use the tap until we can test it thoroughly." As they discussed logistics, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. They could confront this threat together. But just as hope began to take root, the doors of the town hall swung open with a loud bang. In walked a figure draped in shadows, the pale light casting an eerie glow on their features. It was Ben, the farmer who had transformed into something monstrous. His clothes were torn, and his eyes, once warm, now glimmered with an unsettling hunger. The crowd gasped, fear rippling through the assembly. Emily's heart sank as she recognized the unmistakable signs of the virus, the disorientation, the feral glare. "Ben," Joan shouted, taking a step back. "You need help." But Ben merely let out a low growl, his body tensing as he scanned the crowd. The air thickened with panic, and Emily realized they were in immediate danger. "Everyone, back away," she shouted, pushing her way forward to intercept him. "We need to keep our distance." Ben lunged, and chaos erupted. Townspeople scrambled, some rushing toward the exits while others froze in fear. Emily's mind raced. They had to subdue him before he could harm anyone. Mark quickly grabbed a nearby chair, raising it defensively. "Stay back," he yelled, positioning himself between Ben and the crowd. "We don't want to hurt you, but we need you to calm down." Emily took a deep breath, channeling her fear into determination. "Ben, "We can help you. We know what's happening." But Ben only snarled, his humanity seemingly lost beneath the surface. Emily could see his muscles tense, the virus controlling him, pushing him toward aggression. She quickly glanced around, searching for anything that could serve as a makeshift weapon or distraction. Spotting a heavy tablecloth draped over a nearby table, an idea sparked in her mind. "Joan, help me," she shouted, gesturing toward the table. "We need to cover him." As Joan rushed to her side, they grabbed the tablecloth and, with surprising synchronicity, managed to throw it over Ben just as he lunged forward. The cloth enveloped him, temporarily disorienting him. "Now," Emily shouted, and they pulled the tablecloth tight, restricting his movements. The crowd watched in horror, some shouting for help, others paralyzed with fear. "Hold him," Emily directed, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to secure him." Mark moved quickly, using the chair to create a barrier while others helped Emily and Joan bind the cloth around Ben, securing his limbs. As he thrashed against them, the strength of the virus surged, but the makeshift restraint held long enough for Emily to take control. "Everyone, listen," she called, her voice cutting through the noise. "We need to contain him until we understand this virus better. He's not himself, but we can't let him hurt anyone." The townspeople began to rally, moving closer as they found courage in Emily's words. Together, they managed to drag Ben to a corner of the room, securing him against a sturdy post. As Ben continued to struggle, Emily turned her focus to the crowd. "We can't let fear drive us apart. We have to work together." A few townsfolk stepped forward, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. "What can we do?" one man asked, gripping the edge of a table for support.